Welcome to this panel entitled Food Sovereignty. And so I will start this panel with introducing the notion of food sovereignty and talk a little bit about how this relates to Palestine and Palestinians inside and outside Palestine. And then I'm going to introduce my lovely and amazing speakers and start asking or raising some questions. So first of all, food sovereignty is the right of the world's peoples to define and design their own food systems. And it ensures that the collective rights over land territories, water, seeds, livestock, and biodiversity are in the hands of those who produce food. And as you all know that the struggle for food sovereignty carries extra weight in Palestine as Palestinian peasants, in particular artisanal fishers and pastoralists and indigenous communities are caught between the Israeli settler colonialism on the one side and the neoliberal transnational market-driven policies of the PA, the Palestinian Authority. So Palestinians inside Palestine and outside it have been struggling to achieve food sovereignty by resisting the relentless uprooting of Palestinian trees and the crops by Israeli army and settlers, and the expansion of Israeli agribusiness, demonstrating their own smooth steadfastness on their own land and pursuing rural livelihoods. In spite of that, we are in Palestine still having these challenges and the threats to food sovereignty, and the limitations and restrictions are increasing. Therefore, the main question that we try to raise in this panel is how can food sovereignty in Palestine be achieved, whereas political sovereignty is in a crisis? So I am the moderator of this panel. I am Ahmad Qabaha, an assistant professor in post-colonial and comparative literature at the Najaf National University in the West Bank in Palestine. I am the author of the book Exile and Expatriation in Modern Palestinian and American Writing, and I have another book coming soon entitled Post-Millennial Palestinian Narratives of Resistance and National Identity. And I'm going to introduce my brilliant speakers in this panel. First of all, we have Vivien Sansour. She was born in Jerusalem and she lives in Bethlehem and Los Angeles. She's an artist and conservationist, and she is the founder of Palestine Heirloom Seed Library and the Traveling Kitchen project. And our second brilliant speaker is Leila el Haddad. She was born in Kuwait to Palestinian parents from Gaza. She now lives in Maryland. She is a Palestinian journalist, award-winning author, and public speaker. Al Haddad received her BA in Political Science and Comparative Area Studies from Duke University in 2000. And her master's is in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School in 2002. Our third speaker is Nasser Jaber, and he's originally from Ramallah. He came to the United States as a university student in economics and finance. Nasser invested in his passion for food politics and developed his project, Kumida, and he's also the co-founder of Migrant Kitchen with renowned chef Daniel Dorado. And finally, we have Mirna Bamieh. She's an artist and the founder of the Palestine Hosting Society, which has created several projects, and its tables took life in Palestine and different parts of the world like Amman, Abu Dhabi, Warsaw, and New York. And now, as I said, it's very difficult for Palestinians to protect their food sovereignty during this political crisis, and the their circumstances, miserable circumstances under settler colonialism and other challenges, local challenges and global challenges. So the questions might be so many, and we will try to have some questions that relate to this panel. And I will start with Vivien Sansour and ask the question, how does food sovereignty relate to Palestine? And what extent do Palestinian folklore and cultural tales reflect the crisis of food sovereignty and national identity?
Yes, thank you, Ahmed, and thank you, everybody at Palestine Writes for organizing this event. It's so lovely also to be with everyone in our community and to be discussing this very important topic, which I think in in all the years and in all the aspects that we have to kind of juggle and work through as Palestinians. This one, as someone who has been working in this field for many years, it actually brings a lot of joy for me that it's become a more, if you will, popular conversation. Because actually, Ahmed, I think it's not difficult for us to talk about food sovereignty or to work on food sovereignty in Palestine because of the difficult political reality. In fact, it is urgent, because it is in fact part of political resistance that we engage in political sovereignty, and how that translates for not just Palestinians, but for all peoples, all particularly indigenous people, people of color, all people around the world. This conversation is in fact urgent, and not just the conversation, this work is urgent. And it's been urgent because it's the way we come to actually assert our power and assert our agency in a global system that is constantly telling us that we're not worth anything, that what we have is not worth anything, that what our food systems are old-fashioned, and we need to look at some kind of new lab-produced foods in order for us to feed ourselves. And the big lie, which feeds in the practice of colonialism, which is that what our grandparents and our grandmothers and fathers fed us was actually, not enough to feed us. That, all these thousands of years that we have survived, suddenly in the colonial conversation becomes irrelevant and not good enough. And so for us to work on regaining our sense of self through asserting our sense of food power over our food, and food justice as well, is actually a way for us to assert political power. And I will leave it to others to comment. I don't want to, because I could go off, so you need to control me.
Yeah, definitely, yes. Yes, we are proving that we still exist on this land, and protecting these challenges to food sovereignty is really a means of resistance. What do you think, Layla Al Haddad?
Well, first of all, I want to say I've been trying to do a land acknowledgement every time I do an event. And so I just want to say I'm here in Maryland on the ancestral home of the Piscataway, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I acknowledge I'm here as a visitor. And, everything that Vivien said really resonates, I think, with me. Especially, I was kind of laughing when she talked about this conversation having become one that may be more popular, because I think it still has a lot of people scratching their heads, especially in our communities, like, what do you guys do exactly? Or how is that relevant or important? Or they have trouble kind of figuring out how to present our work. And I, love what you said about it being an urgent conversation, not only a conversation, but urgent work to be doing. And ways that we can help pivot, the narrative when we're talking about the Palestinian experience and the narrative and material actions that we can be taking. I think, it's beyond just sort of, I see it as beyond just cultural preservation, but rather perpetuation, as well. I mean, it has many roles, but, there's a lot to say. I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but we were talking earlier about, and I'll put this out there, the sort of problematic paradigm that exists that has a trickle-down effect all the way from, political, from governments and those in political power to large international aid organizations that have come to dominate the landscape, specifically in Gaza, but Palestine, I would say, as a whole. And it's one that is constantly of food security versus, food justice or food sovereignty. And maybe I'll put that out there as something for us to consider as we're having our conversations, and why that has become so problematic. I mean, I can speak to my experience in Gaza, and I'm sure that this is probably equally applicable elsewhere in Palestine. But that has a trickle-down effect from well-meaning aid organizations to, from governments to, like state departments and whatever, who are giving grants. And it's always, the issue always becomes, and the focus and the lens is always on how can we feed Palestinians, specifically, how can we feed Palestinians in Gaza, right? The problem becomes one of food. Like if we just throw enough food into Gaza, it will solve the problem. If we, deliver enough calories, then everything will be okay. And that shifts, the focus away greatly, obviously, from the bigger overarching themes of like, dignity and freedoms and justice. But beyond that, on long-term and sustainable, not just access to food, but control over the food ways and the sources of the food and and on and on. And I think this is a really important question to ask: is how can we hope to work towards or achieve food sovereignty when we lack any semblance of political sovereignty? And I think this is what I would really like to converse with my panelists about and see what they think. But I know that this is something that's really been bothering me, or especially over the past few years. And every time I return to Gaza, I see it more and more. Again, just let's think about how we can feed everyone, but let's not think about, and I talk a lot with small scale farmers, and I see it's like an uphill battle, the struggles that they're trying to have and the impact in terms of, having access. And I would give one small example is when you can't even control, the access in terms of, everything from the seeds that you're getting, right? To the cycle, the growing cycle, and whether or not you can export it in Gaza, to how much or what quality of water that you're using to water your plants. Things become infinitely more complicated. But, before I go on, I just wanted to kind of put that framework out there for us to consider as we continue.
Yeah, definitely speaking. So I definitely agree with you. It's not only about food security in terms of being able to sustain your lives and so on and so forth. It's also a political crisis, and it has to do with the justice. It has to do with settler colonialism. It has to do with the Israeli army preventing farmers from going from one place to another. I can give an example. I myself live in a village in the north of the West Bank, and we have so many acres of land behind the separation wall, and we can't go there. And we have no control over our land. We have no control over the products, and we have no choice but to have the products of Israeli settlements and so on and so forth. And it's very difficult to cope with that. So I agree with both you and Vivian that this is an urgent work, and we need to have this conversation. So Nasser, how does your work from outside Palestine, from the US, help Palestinians to challenge this crisis, really? So you work in restaurants, and let me ask you this question: how do restaurants, for example, function as a space for celebrating heritage and addressing social and political issues that relate to food sovereignty?
It's a good question. Let me begin, I guess, by saying, first of all, none of the work that I have done and I continue to do have not been inspired by the panelists here, especially with Layla. When she took Bourdain to Gaza, I was a waiter at that time, and that was the most inspirational message because it showed the world a different take on Palestine. So she became an ambassador herself, and of course, Vivian is saving the Seed Society, and Mirna is an anthropologist, saving the cuisine and the history behind it. So I think it really depends on the restaurant owners. our food is being appropriated heavily, is being stolen heavily. So I'll give you, Mike, Solomonov in Philly, who owns a restaurant called Zahav, just released a new cookbook called The Israeli Cuisine. And the last page, the dessert is called Zalatima, right?
Yep.
I'm best friends with Salah Zalatima. We opened up a restaurant together, and his family name has been stolen as an Israeli dessert. And unfortunately, that now is being appropriated even further with the UAE-Israeli peace deals. So anyway, my point is that every restaurateur has a mission on their soldiers to reclaim food if they're going to get into the political narrative. But they have to know that the food has to be good, the execution has to be great, and it still has to be a good goddamn restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So, people will go to a Palestinian restaurant, but if the restaurant is meh and it's like not that great, then you're not really doing anybody a favor, right? People are going to say this Palestinian restaurant is awful. But if you have great execution of the food, if you become an ambassador of the food, right? So therefore, with that said, then you become a flag holder. So an example given on that is Raya Bshara with Tanureen. You can love or hate her food. She is still considered the culinary front of Palestinian cuisine in the United States and in New York in particular. And then that led to a Lebanese competitor, Ilili, which became the #1 Lebanese restaurant in the country, that retook their concept of Lebanese food and became a flagship of Lebanese food, right? So having said that, I think restaurateurs and chefs like myself and my team, we look at the work that you guys have been doing, and then we think of concepts that take it further. Now, me personally, I am not a person that's here to preserve the culture of the food. Not because I don't believe in it, quite the opposite. I heavily believe in it, but I believe there are already many protectors of the cuisine. So tatriz and food are things that bring us back to our past. Our identity has been robbed away from us, and it's in our hands to reclaim it back. So Layla, Vivian, Reem, at Palestine Hosting Society, they're all reclaiming back this narrative. My job is to think of the future, right? How does our cuisine go forward compared to the cuisines in the region, right? How do we think? I mean, I love Il Bouli, for example, which was the #1 restaurant in the world for like quite some time. And how do we make see-through kibbeh? How do we make kufta with Yemeni coffee? I mean, those are the things that we were talking about. We did ma'lube with tufah, which was a dish that we did for an UNRWA dinner to raise money for Gaza. Those are different approaches, but at the same time, I'm inserting the Palestinian narrative everywhere we go. So it depends on the mission of the restaurateur, but unfortunately, a lot of restaurateurs don't take the political track, right? It's a scary tactic. It could be burned down quickly. You can get a lot of attacks. There's now a restaurant in Canada that's under constant attacks by the Zionists because they support Palestine. People have to be willing to take that risk. And unfortunately, unfortunately for us, we were able to take that risk, but it came after 10 years of failure, right? But when we tried it, but now we have enough resources to be like, yeah, fuck you. We can do whatever we want. And we were claiming our narrative.
Okay, thank you so much, Nasser. Yes, and I think, yes, resistance to the appropriation of our food is one of the main components of our national narrative, and you are contributing hugely to this national narrative and to the preservation of the Palestinian identity through the work and the projects you have done so far. And also Mirna Bamieh has a wonderful project, and I want to ask her to reflect on her experience with the establishment of the Palestine Hosting Society, which is a live art project that explores traditional food culture in Palestine, especially those that are on the verge of disappearing. So can you please talk a little bit about this, Mirna?
Hey everyone, it's really a pleasure to be with you tonight. So I started the Palestine Hosting Society in 2017, and it came from a need for me when I was, my art practice is mostly in video and installations, and I felt a need to do something with my hands and to combine my two passions, which is food and art, together. And it came from a need for me to want to create projects that resonate more with the community and somehow help me answer those big questions that we always ask ourselves as artists. What can we contribute with what we create in our art? Because we definitely cannot stop making art, but sometimes we constantly ask this question: how can we change the present moment? Especially when we come from places where the politics is very heavy and feels not in our control, and we cannot somehow have logical explanations for everything that happens to us. So I wanted to somehow have my art practice as a place where that helps me deal with those issues, with issues of identity, of place, of colonization, of being not of being a receptor most of the time. And I wanted to reverse that. So I started getting more and more interested in food, because obviously I love food and everybody loves food. And I went to culinary school because I wanted to go deeper into this passion. And midway through my studies, I realized that I am very frustrated with what is being offered as Palestinian food on menus in Palestine and throughout all the world. And I was asking questions. I was having meetings with chefs from different parts of Palestine and outside Palestine, and trying to understand, like, why is the menu of Palestinian food is very limited, and why can we not imagine our food, especially after I was going deeper into traditional Palestinian kitchen. It was very rich, and it had all those layers and all those dishes that I did not know that they are part of my identity, that they are part of my story. And I was interested in understanding, why was this link broken? Why did I not know about those dishes? Why was I not aware about this richness, and this sense of identity was flattened, this food identity, and it stopped at maqlouban msakhan and those dishes. So that it came from those questions. And then the more I was learning, because I created this project, and somehow it was a learning experience for me, and it still is, and it keeps getting more and more interested, and I keep finding those associations and those stories. And I realized that actually we can reclaim our story as Palestinians through the intimacy of the kitchen stories that we have in different parts of Palestine and the diaspora. And maybe those voices that have been suppressed because they do not make it to media, because they don't have this strong voice that everybody wants to hear, maybe we can actually, through those voices, reclaim our sense of pride, and we can regain our voices and speak up, and not have other people to appropriate our kitchen and have us think that we do not like that's what colonization does. As Vivian said, it tries to make you less proud and less aware, and knowledge is our tool for that, to know, to ask, and to reclaim the richness that somehow we lost with all the traumas that we've been going through as Palestinians.
Yeah.
Sorry, we all wanted to pitch in. I just wanted to say that whatever you said, Mirna, somehow it triggered the. No, I was just gonna say also, I mean, I love what you said, everything that you said, and just add that that, you know, I think people mistakenly think that food is just kind of sort of a cultural marker and something that, you know, it ends there, right? But I think it's very important, and I'm going to throw this out there, that food can be, you know, wielded as a weapon by the settler colonial power, just as it was in the United States with the, you know, with the buffalo and so on and so forth. And I think, you know, this is a thing, right? We may know it, others are not very cognizant of it. And they think, oh, it's so nice, you just want to talk, you know, be able to have your cultural tokens. But no, it really goes beyond that into how you know, the Israelis are wielding this as a weapon. And, you know, I'll just add one more thing, which is I also find that food is an incredibly powerful way to be able to narrate the Palestinian experience and, you know, be able to provide oral histories. It gets people to open up and say things and talk in ways that other, you know, sticking a microphone in their face will not do. So that's something else that I,
Yeah, definitely. I think, yes, reclaiming our food is like reclaiming our own story, and reclaiming and owning our own story is like reclaiming and owning our own land. So I think, yes, it's a very, very powerful means of resistance. And yes, as Mirna said, we need the channels to speak out and to reclaim our pride and our voice, and to narrate our story through talking about our own dishes, which are really part of our own identity. I like your interventions in terms of talking about this struggle as something that is ever represent and also future oriented. What do you think, Vivian?
Thank you, Ahmad, actually, for this question, because I actually wanted to go back to a comment that Nasser made about, well, first, thank you for acknowledging our work, but also to say that this is, he said something about you're not interested in conserving the food because you think enough people are doing it. And I want to just touch on 2 points that I think are urgent, since we are, I think, in a way at home here together. One is that I don't think there's enough people doing this work at all. And I also think that we are not just food antatriz as a people. And more importantly, I mean, for me, I think the conversation about food appropriation definitely is important, but I'm not interested in talking about it. And the reason I'm not interested in talking about it, because I think it just keeps us in the same old paradigm that we're always allowing ourselves to slip back into, which is we have to respond to somebody else's violation. And I think we do have to respond. And the way we respond, I think, is that by actually creating a new story. So it's not true that we're not looking at the future because we're excavating stories of the past. So whether it's Layla or myself or Mirna, who are going to kind of look for old recipes or whatever, that doesn't mean that we are stagnant. We are the culture. The culture isn't Imam Muhammad and Abu Muhammad and our grandparents and our grandmothers, whatever, and grandfathers. They inform us. They inform us of where we came from. And it's our job to be better designers for the future. And this doesn't, again, apply just for us as Palestinians, but for the whole world again. And so for the world, for the sake of the world, and for the sake of Palestine, we actually have to be more diligent and more brave in saying, okay, this is what our ancestors did, and this is what they did then, and this is who we used to be, this is who we are today, and we will be tomorrow. And so what does this tomorrow look like? And not to leave that to somebody else's design, but to be active agents in this design. And we're being called to do that as a human society, actually. And this COVID pandemic, for example, has really iterated this for everybody, those who wanted to hear it and those who didn't want to hear it. It's like now, whether you like it or not, you're going to face it. And what we're facing today is that we have failed as a human society. We have also had many challenges as a Palestinian society and as a society who has been deformed. We look at ourselves and we try to get glimpses of who we are through a very deformed face. It's like when you're going to, I remember I was in Jerusalem one time and I went into this neighborhood that's been completely Judified and nobody, there's just, and it's like, this looks familiar, but it's not my face. I don't know who I am. And I think this is where we are, sadly. And we really need to be agents in our own story. So, yes, be informed by the past, but that's not only what we're doing. We're being informed by it. We're honoring it. Like when Layla started, we also honor the people who have sacrificed their lives so we can be here, and also understand the power of what they provided the world. So when we talk about what our parents and grandparents and grandparents 10,000 years ago gave the world, we gave the world bread. The whole world eats cookies and bread because of the genius of our ancestors. And if we put this aside, then we are really failing ourselves, our past, and also the real true lesson in the development of bread and food. And that is that our ancestors were not idiots, and they were not these kind of lame losers. They actually were imaginative people, and they did apply imagination. This is why and how we have the bread of today. Like, someone was so crazy, decided that a wild grass would one day become a wheat we eat. So it required both artistry and scientific thinking to actually bring this forward. And that's what we're being asked to do again and again, and not to let the violence of others hijack our own imagination and kind of distract us from the work that is really in front of us: A, survival, and B, the design of the future for our children and for the generations to come.
Yes, I think this is really, really an impressive and brilliant input. And I totally agree with you that we need to reclaim and reconnect with our roots and to know how to steer and lead our roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. So I think this is great. And I feel that Layla Al Haddad is trying to add something. And let me ask you this.
I always have something to add, but I don't want to dominate. I want to hear Mirna and Nasser talk as well. But I was just going to quickly throw out that, before I forgot, that one of the biggest tragedies, kind of following up on what Vivian said in Gaza specifically, is that as a result of the longevity, of this very deliberate and despicable, siege, and the resulting long-term aid dependence, and the whole sort of cycle, the way that it all works, they all, bomb Gaza and buy the food from the same people that bombed Gaza and then feed Gaza. Yeah. The result of all this is that, and this was really palpable, and when I visited exactly 1 year ago, is that most people no longer have a memory of many of the very traditional dishes and how they were made in Gaza. I mean, it almost made me cry. It was very sad. I mean, people really just didn't know. They didn't even have a memory that they could revisit and say, this is how this dish was made. I mean, it has drastically altered the cuisine in Gaza, drastically, from the ground up, just over 10 years. And I mean, like, dishes that people used to make. It wasn't before, it might have been substitutions. That's completely absent from the landscape now. Nobody uses olive oil anymore, or frika, or anything, because it's just simply not even affordable. It's gone from not being affordable to just being absent in their memory and their everyday use. So I just wanted to throw that out there to be able to, eventually speak about the impact of, bringing it back to when we were discussing, food sovereignty and the consequences of aid dependence, and, fueling that whole cycle of, the way the aid organizations work and what alternatives are out there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think this is interesting, and let's try to move the discussion a little bit to what's happening inside the West Bank and Gaza. I think it's very important to ask the question, how is food sovereignty in Palestine possible while the potentials of the farmers at home are limited financially, technically, and politically? So what are your perspectives and your visions about that?
Sorry, Ahmad, I didn't hear the last bit of the question.
Okay, so I'm trying to ask the question, practically speaking, and in relation to Palestinians inside the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And the question is, how is food sovereignty in Palestine possible while the potentials of farmers at home are limited financially, technically, and also politically?
Who's answering this question?
I want to hear from you.
I wanted to say some comments about what we were discussing a bit before, and I will try to combine it with this question. Well, for Palestinians, we've been through lots of traumas with the war, with colonization, and Israel is the last one of that. But we have to, as well, to connect that with the world, and the Industrial Revolution and capitalism has created a trauma for humanity as well. And by going back to the knowledge our ancestors had, we create a space for healing. That's why I think it's very relevant for the present moment and the future. And by bringing this knowledge to us now, somehow we try to, it's not going back, it's not with the nostalgic, it's not really like nostalgia and going back. It creates those moments where we can reclaim the present moment and create a better future while having this space that somehow is trying to heal itself, because we are not disconnected as people of citizens of the world, as Palestinians, from everything that's happening. And there has been a rupture. There has been a rupture of time where everything was going so fast, and we lost lots of knowledge and sensibilities in dealing with what we eat, how things grow, and our connections as communities and groups together. And back to your question, I think it's through this knowledge, through this the know-how of learning and relearning and gaining those tools, and we will be able somehow to liberate ourselves and not wait for political decisions or like this magical moment where we can create our present moment. We have to reclaim it for ourselves, and knowledge is our tool for that, and to give to give a value for this knowledge, and to ask people and to remember together, because we're talking about generations that are with us but can leave us at any moment. So for me, it's food sovereignty comes from knowledge and reclaiming this knowledge and bringing it to the present moment and building on it for the future. It's to have food create a space and a place for us where we can talk together in a new and a fresh way, where we can listen, because I think politics has took that from us. We cannot hear each other, we cannot listen to each other, and we forgot to ask the right questions. So it creates this place where we somehow reclaim what we have lost over like the hundreds of years before.
Yeah, definitely speaking. But I sometimes hear some people who are skeptical about this theoretical discussion and the ways in which we are talking about knowledge and writing. And they ask, how can writing and knowledge resist the drastic changes on the ground, where we have Israeli settlers destroying our crops, trees, and the land is taking from us every day? What do you think?
It's not easy, but I think the power of the voice, of having voices that can create pressure on the world is a tool, and it's a weapon, especially when you talk about nations that, you know, like having a voice is power. So there are things that happen on the ground that are too brutal, and you sleep and you wake up and you have your house destroyed or your land totally burnt, or you cannot even reach for your land. But we cannot be stuck in that box and, you know, like surrender. We have to keep cultivating our voices and to make them stronger, and to have more and more people aware and use their voices to help.
Okay, so Layla,
change as well, not only to help.
Yeah, Layla, let me return to you with this question. So under the ever-present threat that I referred to food sovereignty in Palestine, how can it be salvaged in that region? So what tactics can be used to resist this threat? And what models are we seeing or participating in on the ground that show major breakthroughs in the way we are building resilience in the face of destruction? Who are we inspired by?
That's a really good question. And, I also want to hear, obviously, what everyone thinks. How can we move forward on this specific front, given all of the obstacles? But, starting at the latter part of your question, who are we inspired by? I mean, I personally, every time I have a chance, which is, very rare these days, to go back to Gaza, I'm constantly inspired by specifically the women, but all of the men and women and farmers who, despite all of the impossible odds, keep cultivating, keep sowing the seeds of resistance, literally and figuratively, keep putting food on the table, keep preserving and perpetuating the heritage, keep sane and some semblance of control when everything else is out of their control. Keep hope alive. I mean, these are the people I'm inspired by. I go back and I think, wow, we have it wrong. Even if I'm from there, you still go away and you still feel so sometimes downtrodden and hopeless. And you think, you don't have any reason or right to feel hopeless when you have people there who are literally, as the cliche goes, resisting through existing. And so these are the people that really inspire me the most and make me want to, keep at it and find, somebody was saying about practical solutions. And that's really why I shifted my focus years ago when, I started off just doing, hard news and journalism. And it was really, I felt like I was writing the same headline every day and every decade, where I felt like being able to, shift the focus and the narrative and from the perspective of not just food, but farming and so forth, was so much more effective in a material way. And so for me, those are the heroes. And beyond that, from a practical standpoint, are the ones that I want to support the most. The small scale farming initiatives, the women's cooperatives. Lately there's been, there's many personal heroes of mine in Gaza that have sustainable and organic farms, not in the sort of modern Western, way, but going back to traditional farming methods that reduce their dependence and reliance on Israeli fertilizers and pesticides and water in general. And I just feel like it's always frustrating because they're not as prominent, they're not as highlighted. I feel like there isn't as many efforts because it goes back to how do you feed the most people in the most efficient way, rather than how can we sow real, long-lived, sustainable, food sovereignty and sovereignty for food ways as well. So this is something I'm always struggling with, but I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, I think you addressed it perfectly well. What do you think?
I mean, there's people that I saw also working with hydroponics and aquaponic farms that are becoming quite popular in Gaza as well, and all this kinds of thing. Doing things with as little material supplies as possible, be it land, your soil, water, etc.
Yeah, definitely speaking.
And then, of course, you have those obstacles, the physical barriers and obstacles between Gaza, the West Bank, the rest of Palestine, that I think we don't really take into consideration as much as we should when we're discussing practical solutions. I mean, we know it, but I feel like we still need to say it to remember things are infinitely more difficult in that sense. I mean, even us here as Palestinians, this is probably the first time that we've been in a virtual forum together. It's been impossible. We've tried so many times, me and Mirna and Vivian, just to get together in like one space to have a discussion and any kind of event. And even that proved to be so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, Layla has a good point on the fact.
Definitely speaking. I think, yes, this is one of them, absolutely.
I think Nasser was trying to say something, Ahmad.
Yes, but I think the internet connection is unstable. Maybe. Hello, Nasser.
Yeah,
Nasser. Go ahead, please.
I mean, Layla is 100% correct on all the things she mentioned. And I see that firsthand, like how do we cut off the dependency on the macro picture? But at the same time, the micro, which is the immediate need for assistance, is so urgent that you have to think on like how to get the maximized efforts for that. And it's I mean, like I haven't never been to Gaza, although my mom is there, but I can tell you that I worked in a lot of camps in Lebanon. And, you know, the urgent need always supersedes the macro need. And that's not because, and yes, there has to be effort that needs to be done in terms of solving the larger problem at a whole, which requires more resources, more access, more different things. But unfortunately, with the limited resources that we have, we end up having to choose between what's now and what's for tomorrow. And it's tough. It's really, really tough. And like, you know, how do we decrease our purchasing power from Israeli products, especially on food, which were probably, I think, 70% of their market, when there is the Paris Accord embedded in Oslo, perpetuated by the PA, which doesn't allow us to build factories so we can produce actual food? How do we allow, for example, I don't know if people know, but like the Israelis are not allowed to sell us female sheep and cattle. Simply because like you can't reproduce it, they only send you the male. When we did the feeding for the Augusta Victoria Hospital in Jerusalem, we were falling into violations of BDS. Why? Because if I wanted to buy meat from the local supermarket, the amount of cost to feed the Augusta Victoria Hospital, again, other sick Palestinians, was 4 times the cost, instead of me going directly to the slaughterhouse inside the settlement, which is the Israeli source. It's a problem, right? So yeah, we chose initially to buy directly from the Palestinians, but with the limited resources I have, I can't scale at that level. And then there was back and forth talks with the BDS folks, and of course I respect the narrative and I'm a proud supporter, but at the end of the day, like it became a question of like how much can I scale up versus do I, you know, fall into principles? And unfortunately, there was no other way around it. So this was these are difficult choices that we have to make.
What's the end goal?
For me or for?
Yeah, I mean, not to belabor this point, but when you're talking about, you know, scaling up and whatever, and sort of
for me, the most, to be honest with you,
and someone here asked a good question. Is scaling related to resistance?
Sure, absolutely. But like maybe my own personal experience have never put me in that way. I don't consider myself an academic. I do not consider myself a person that can solve all the world problems. But in terms of like what we do, I try to find immediate solutions to what we care about. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes down to feeding Palestinians who are hungry, and now their income disparity is lower because they can't work in Israel, and then there's like Somalian and like Afro laborers in Israel, and they're making 700 shekels a month, and they can't afford food. My job is to provide them 3 meals a day by any means necessary, because that little food that they have will not allow them to take their kids on the street to go beg for khubz, which happens heavily in Beirut, which happens heavily in Zaatari, which happens heavily everywhere else. So for me, those are the problems I'm trying to solve, and I will solve even if the execution of those things happen with unfortunate, you know, people who violate our question of larger resistance.
Well, let me give you 2 alternative examples in Gaza that I recently saw. One is, you know, people were asking how they can help and they can support. Kinder USA, who, you know, I like to support for a long time, based out of, you know, I think Vivian is there now, Los Angeles. They do projects specifically with chicken farming owned by women. So women-owned chicken farms in Gaza. And, you know, it's a, you know, loop where you're supporting the women who are heads of households, who traditionally have been shown to be more fiscally responsible, providing for their families, and you're helping the local economy, right? Yeah. Another one that I visited that was supported by the Rebuilding Alliance, but also Kinder USA, and I think Anira also supports, is one that was, someone asked about food waste. In an effort to reduce food waste and keep the loop closed, they were buying surplus produce from the market, either end of season or whatever, that was grown locally, that was then used to make breakfast and afternoon snacks and meals for school children in specific vulnerable areas where the children are only getting 1 meal a day. and they were cooked by local women's cooperatives in particular districts. And so again, closed loop, right? You were getting the product locally, you were putting to work, So there's always options. I feel like it's up to us to find them and to support them, right? But I'm just providing alternative examples. I know you work on a different scale. I
do have to disagree. I mean, I do agree with you that those options are available in the United States, sure. But, you know, if once the explosion happened in Beirut and 80% of goods did not come, where are you getting it from? You know what I mean? Like there's only one or two sources. So I don't think that those options are universal. I think they're very specific to certain areas. And yeah, like, you know, in New York, we fed 2 million people. I always bought locally, supported local farms, bought from immigrants, and chose to go with certain people instead of Cisco, for example. But I don't necessarily have those options in Yemen. You know, so like, I mean, I feel like.
No, I mean, it's the very ugly way the world works is that the UN and the World Food Program and everyone are forced to buy the wheat at triple the price, you know, and double the tax by way of Israel from the United States, who was funding the destruction, you know, and it's very troubling. And how do we as individuals counter that? And what is our role?
No,
you know,
anyway,
it's a different conversation, but I don't know. I welcome others into it as well.
No, but you're right, especially on World Food Program, which buy at a certain rate, and sometimes because they're unfortunately like they're bureaucratic NGO types who are in the business of just remaining as NGOs. So they're there to spend the money so they can get the next grant. So they will pay at 2 or 3 times the price. I can go to the same sources as a private entity and buy at a lower cost, and then give it to UNRWA, for example, which is better than them spending the money on it. And also the efficiency that happens from within. Like I'll give you, when we're talking about food sovereignty, let's talk about water. Water security in the camps is at a whole destructive level. UNRWA built a reservoir in Shatila that was later on taken down by Fatah gangs, right? Who now sell the water internally. So yeah, this big project was built, the money was spent. And of course, now they go ask for another grant because that's what NGOs do. They're going from grant to grant, and the water reservoir doesn't do anything. These are the inefficiencies that happen within these organizations. So that's another set of problems outside of the fact that we have to buy from companies that participate in the colonization of our people, right? Which is a problem.
I mean, yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. We don't have to do anything, right? It just depends that's why I was asking about our end goal. It really depends on what your priorities are and what your.
I mean, like as far the migrant Jaber Dorado Enterprises with all its entities, Migrant Kitchen, Braze, Mulahem, and everything else is only dedicated to fighting food insecurity at any means necessary. And if that means, you know, violating BDS to buy at cheaper cost, I will do it. You know, if that means I have to go to Cargill and buy stuff to feed in Mexico on the Colombia-Venezuela border, which we have done certain meals, I will do it. Unfortunately for me, the end result is to make sure that these kids are fed, and it's not, you know, the other stuff.
Okay, I see. Okay, thank you, Nasser. I think I understand your point, but I think Vivian works with farmers on the ground. What do you think, Vivian?
Yes, Ahmed, thank you. And well, I have a lot to say about this and about particularly what Nasser is saying. I'm not sure where to start, but I think there is a danger, a real serious danger in the way, for me, this is presented. And the idea that we're constantly like saying, oh, well, I don't have another choice. And with all due respect, Nasser, I think when we say there is no other way, it's us surrendering to a very mediocre imagination where we are not allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable just a little bit even, because in order for us to imagine a different reality, we're going to have to be very uncomfortable. And I think that in order for us to also really, truly make a change for ourselves, for our community, for farmers on the ground, and as you very much emphasized earlier, for the future of our food, then we have to do something really uncomfortable and really brave and break ourselves out of these paradigms that, you know, you say, I have to obey to them. So how is that different? How is our conversation about liberation, food liberation, or our own social liberation, how does it fit in me surrendering to this kind of, okay, this is what's available, so I'm going with that. And so to say that, it's really important then to say, okay, if we really are at a very, very important moment. We've been in this moment, but now, again, more important moment in history is, do we want to continue this mediocre existence, or do we really want to break it? And people may call me idealistic, naive, too purist, whatever. Well, I'd rather die. I literally would rather die than to continue in this mediocre human society. And let me tell you something, like, the other thing is, when we talk about Palestine, all that we've talked about here today as Palestinians engaging in a very important conversation is the problem. Well, where have we talked really about what is really happening and how we really can do the uncomfortable thing? I don't have to eat Israeli products. I also don't have to surrender to the fact where I need to be fed and feed my own people from the crap that the same system that oppresses my people is actually producing. And so when we talk, I work with farmers on the ground. I am a farmer myself in Palestine. We go over so many issues every day. And the reason my whole life has been about this subject is not because I'm so brilliant. I'm just an average girl who knows how to tell a story. But the true brilliance is in people like Layla was saying, when I work with a woman in a Daeshi refugee camp and I go to her and her home is destroyed, and then she's feeding me delicious spinach pies, then she takes my hand and shows me where she built a garden on the ruins of her home, and then she's feeding her neighbors. So let's go back to imagining something that actually weaves us into a new tapestry in the world that actually honors who we are. We are not a people who leave our neighbors hungry. We're a people who feed each other. So actually, if we invest more, if we raise awareness locally also about why the Palestinian Imam Muhammad's bandora is more actually valuable than the settlement bandora, even though the settlement bandora is cheaper. Yes, Nasser, but the problem with that is the settlement bandora is cheaper because there's not enough people buying Imam Muhammad's bandora.
I have to say, I respect all those points, but I do have to say our mediocre imagination fed 2.5 million people, and our solutions have provided more than anybody on this.
Fed them crap and fed them the same lies that they're worth nothing, and all they have to do is eat the crap.
Muhammad's bandora needs to be supported. Imam Muhammad cannot produce 1,000 tons of bandora. Okay.
But Nasser, that is the global problem. It's not even about Palestine. This is why we are in the crap we're in today.
I totally understand, and we're getting a lot of your points of view, not just yours, but a lot of people have been saying this. And my question is, at the bottom is, at the end of the day, as long as you can execute on scale, and until you go to the camps and bury children, we had to bury children from the Yarmouk when we were there in Beirut. So I'm sorry, I'm very sensitive about this. But until you're actually in that field and providing and executing that scale that we do on daily basis, 3 times a day, your opinions don't matter. Give me another solution that works, and then we will take it from there.
Well,
I have to agree with Vivian here. The problem is, I said this on the chat, but the long-term impact of, accepting this paradigm and this system, I think, and I've seen it firsthand in Gaza, is far more damaging in a much shorter time frame than you can ever imagine. If you've been to Gaza, you'll know what I'm talking about. Than the short-term needs. And I think, I really liked what someone else said here, which is that, by supporting mediocre, you are feeding the system that makes these people hungry in the first place. And someone else was saying, why can't you do both? It's not up to you. I really appreciate the effort, obviously, and the intention, but, we all know the path to hell is paved with good intentions, not suggesting anything about you specifically, but meaning we can do better, right? You can do better. You're not the World Food Program or whatever. You're not obligated. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but at the same time, we're all amongst good company here. And I don't want to sort of go on the attack, but I think it's just an appeal to say that given how passionate you are and given, the skills and access you have, I think you can choose to take a different path, one that maybe combines sort of the best of both worlds, your good intentions and the support.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we don't do things we do good intention for Palestine, for Latin America, but at the core of it, like I mentioned, we don't sugarcoat it. We are disaster capitalists. But the truth of the matter is that, yeah, sure, no problem. You provide a scalable approach that we can execute, and we're happy to look at it. But as far as we're concerned, I think our team, which tends to be some of the best in solving disasters on large scales like Katrina, we have been providing solutions that I don't think anyone here can provide. So that's fine. Do it. I mean, like, send us the stuff. We will take a look at it. I'm sure we'll find a women's cooperative somewhere in Gaza that can feed 2.5 million people. Yeah, I'm sure. Well, maybe. I don't know.
Okay, thank you all. I think we need to open this discussion for any question that we might get from the audience. So we have one question here from Ahmad Sahili. Have indigenous agricultural and culinary symbols lost all political efficacy in light of their appropriation as symbols of a class status? What do you think?
What was this question for?
For everyone. It's, have indigenous agricultural and culinary symbols lost political efficacy in light of their appropriation as symbols of class status?
For everyone, what do you think, Layla?
I'm still reeling from the other conversation because I'm sorry, but I just can't, it just strips, again, I'm just thinking from my experience in Gaza, but it strips Palestinians completely of all dignity and humanity when we think of them as, bodies that need to be fed. This has been the problem that has just, accumulated and aggravated, life in Gaza over the past decade. As long as we can provide them with 1,200 calories, things will be okay, right? Screw the farms and the farmers and, anything related to food sovereignty or whatever. They just need food. It doesn't matter what kind, as the UN has proven, until they finally added chickpeas in the past couple of years. But white flour, white sugar, just soy oil, that's fine, right?
Yeah.
And it's really not. Anyway, I just, but if you really want me to answer this question, it seems like a very sort of academic question, but I don't know, maybe Vivian or Mirna, why don't you pitch in? You've been—
Mirna, what do you think, Mirna?
Have indigenous agricultural and culinary symbols lost all political efficacy in light of their appropriation as symbols of class status?
I still do not understand the question fully. But I want to pitch in about the discussion that we were having, Nasser, Vivian, and Layla. And I think we have to think about the food that we put. It's not, as well as Layla said, it's just the calorie that we put. We have to think that maybe this food is actually causing problems for people. It's more complicated. It's not about body just being fed, as Layla said. It's a network, and this network, if we keep doing the wrong choices, that we have to keep expanding our imagination, because maybe we are creating more problems, and we are creating problems that we fail to solve, and that will somehow escalate and create more and more problems for us in the future and for other people to deal with. It's always important to ask those questions and to be clear with ourselves in the answer, even if we don't want to hear the answers, but we really don't want to create problems that did not happen before us creating these solutions. And I think the knowledge of how to in agriculture, how food was created before, how it was cooked, how it was shared, how it was planted, did not lose its value, and it actually has fed and sustained people for centuries, and will never lose that status. I'm still not sure I understand the question, but.
So I have another question here on chat, and it is about boycott. So do you think boycott can make any changes on the ground? Or do you think this is a practical solution to food sovereignty crisis in Palestine?
Well, this is a very tangled question because boycott can be suppressive as well. If we keep saying no for everything without creating alternative solutions, then we are part of the problem. So you cannot say a yes and no question for this. There should always be ethical questions that need to be answered before saying yes and no. And when in doubt with boycott, just say no. So yeah.
What
but
was
you need always to ask the hard questions when it comes to boycott, because now we cannot boycott everything, but we cannot say yes to everything. So it depends what kind of boycott, because every little while there's a new thing to boycott. So I cannot answer a question to boycott in general. Like, if you can specify that.
I didn't hear the full question, but I just want to say that with boycott, I think there's a mistaken assumption that it's either all or nothing. But if you actually study the, specifics of the BDS movement, it's what's known as a targeted boycott, a strategic boycott of specific, either companies or depending on.
Or the product of Israeli settlements in particular, the products of Israeli settlements. And so Vivian, can I ask you this question that I have got also in chat? So there are people who are saying you need to join other struggles, like struggles of people of color and women's struggles when it comes to the struggle for the Palestinian narrative and reclaiming Palestinian land and food sovereignty. What do you think?
So the question is whether we need to join other people's struggles?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And I think, in fact, it is, again, an urgent thing that we must give ourselves to, in fact. And as Palestinians, and we're sitting here today, it's important that we also release our commitment to this notion that we're unique, because we are not unique. We share, of course, together we share our own set of circumstances, our own struggle, but we are actually subject to a lot of, to the system that created the same miseries that exist in Latin America, that exist in Africa, that exist in Southeast Asia, that exist here in the United States. And so I think it's really important that actually we weave ourselves into the global struggle, learn and share, rather than just say, oh, no one suffered like we do. This is not a competition as to who suffers more. It's actually, I would like to lose this competition if it is one. But I want to say also, which actually addresses a little bit, in my view, what we've been discussing here about, which solutions do we choose or whatever. Again, I want to say that, we're not just, pets that need to be fed and just to survive or whatever. Like we're even that has to have some dignity, first of all. And second of all, when we talk about Israeli occupation, for example, it's important to understand it in the global system. So for me, I don't think the Israeli occupation is not something that's sustained by not even religion or even ethnocentric or Zionism or only. It is sustained by a neoliberal capitalist system that actually oppresses all people. And so how do we create solidarity networks that actually can support us increasing these little oases, and not just oases for struggle, but also how do we increase our spaces of tenderness, our spaces of honesty, our spaces of courage, so that we can create a more wholesome world. And that also, again, feeds into, of course, our foodways, the way we run our world in general. And as we talk today about climate change, which is a very real thing, and if you talk to farmers in Palestine, they don't always use these terms, climate change, but if you ask farmers, they might tell you something like Sahel Atshan, the valley's thirsty. You know, it's just, this is how we understand, because farmers are scientists and they know with embodied knowledge what's happening. But this is happening with farmers I work with all over the world. And so as we battle climate change, we come to understand that people of privilege will survive better for a little longer, maybe a little more comfortably, you know, they'll be able to afford AC when it gets so hot, they'll have heat when it's just intolerably cold. But in the end, we are on this planet together, and we will sink together, or we will float together. So the idea that we're just Palestine and what happens in Palestine is only in Palestine is actually a very limited view and a dangerous view, because we really need our brothers and sisters in struggle. And I think we also have something important to contribute to it. And within it lies the seed of our survival and flourishment for the future.
In fact, you know, going along on this point, last year, the Middle East Children's Alliance in the Bay Area was going to start its first food delegation to Palestine and bring different supporters and activists and from different communities in the US to try to bridge those two worlds, you know, and try to find a different angle on which to, you know, educate and, you know, people about the situation on the Palestinian struggle on a different front. But unfortunately, COVID happened. But this is a very important question, and, you know, definitely something that has not been happening enough. I think it's too often relegated to the, you know, field of the, you know, oh, it's something kind of, it's not political enough, it's too cushy, it's just culture, whatever. But as the conversation has shown today, it's critical, it's urgent, as Vivian said, and it's definitely something we need to loop in other communities too as well, ally ourselves with, and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Layla, for this interesting input. And what do you think, Nasser?
Yeah, I mean, those points are all valid. The idea is that, I mean, we have to find solutions to these problems.
Yeah. And what do you think, Mirna? Let's end this session with your intervention. Hello, Mirna.
Mirna, I think you're on mute.
No, yes, I unmuted myself. Thank you. One of the last questions that you wanted to ask was the place of art in all this, in reclaiming this ancestral knowledge and looking at all those traditional food practices, seeds, farming, and how can they change the present moment, and why do we do what we do? And I think part of that is to have the imagination of imagining futures that would not exist without the efforts of individuals working towards liberating themselves, their own bodies, their own communities, and then the world, and not only seeing themselves, you know, as individuals that just want to survive and eat and, you know, live. So I think to keep thinking of alternative ways of imagining our homelands, of imagining our lives and the future is one way we can bring to what we do in life. And I think for me, for instance, I'm an artist, so I want to have that space being activated, art being a place where change is created, and to have all those tough questions being asked over and over for myself and for my community and for the world as well, and you know, to have the guts of wanting more and not to settle for easy solutions. And what we grew up in capitalism, and we grew up in a place that tells us buy tomatoes from the supermarket, and maybe this is cheaper, go for that, or maybe it's a waste of time to try to, I don't know, to create your own food sovereignty for you, for your family. So trying to imagine other ways other than what is easy and immediate is a place that I want for me, myself and the people around me to reclaim. And I think it starts from that. Sovereignty starts by saying, I want to do it myself, and I want to find a way of doing that, even if politics tell me it's impossible, and even if the future is not promising, and even if we do not know if we will survive for another 30 years, but to keep trying.
We need really to keep determination and to cultivate hope until things change on the ground, and we find our solutions for the crisis in food sovereignty and other political crises that we have. I'm afraid we are approaching the end of this session. Let me thank you all, my speakers, for your lovely, amazing, inspiring, and thought-provoking ideas. We really learned from you. You informed and taught us a lot. Thank you so much, and we would love to see you again. Thank you, Vivien Sansour. Thank you, Leila el Haddad. Thank you, Nasser Jaber, and thank you, Mirna Bamieh. Thank you so much, and
thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad. It was very